They chose her birthday, her own birthday. 40 guests were standing in a garden full of string lights and white linen and flowers and the smell of food that had been cooking since morning. Her 3 daughters were running through the grass in matching yellow dresses. The cake had not been cut yet. The music was still playing, and then her mother-in-law stood up, tapped a glass, and delivered a speech that was not a toast. It was a public execution. She called Lenora unworthy. She called her a burden. She said her son deserved better. And then she pulled a sealed envelope from her handbag, walked it across the garden in front of everyone, and set it down on the birthday table right next to the cake. Divorce papers. At her own birthday party, in front of her children. Her 10-year-old daughter started crying without making a sound. Her husband stood near the fence and said nothing. The other woman, the one nobody had invited, stood by the dessert table and smiled. But here is what none of them knew. Not the husband, not the mother-in-law, not the woman who thought she had already won. The ground they were standing on, the house, the garden, the string lights above their heads, every single inch of it belonged to Lenora. And the $17 billion she had been hiding for 20 years was about to change everything. Lesson and value statement. This is a story about what happens when people mistake a woman's silence for emptiness and her patience for weakness. It is a story about the difference between being quiet and being powerless. And it is a reminder that sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one nobody is paying attention to. If you have ever been underestimated, overlooked, or counted out by people who never bothered to look closely enough, this story was made for you. If any part of this story speaks to you or reminds you of someone you love, leave a comment and tell us which moment hit you the hardest. Like this video so more people can find it. Subscribe to this channel if you have not yet, because we tell stories like this every single week. And share this one with someone who needs to hear it today. Sometimes one story at the right time can change the way a person sees themselves. The fluorescent lights in the hospital hallway buzzed the way they always do at 2 in the morning, like they were tired too, but nobody had given them permission to rest. Lenora Hayes stood against the wall with her back pressed flat against the cold surface, still wearing the clothes she had thrown on when the phone rang. Her hands were shaking, not the delicate kind of shaking that people notice and ask about, the kind that starts somewhere deep in the chest and works its way out through the fingers like a current that cannot be stopped. A doctor walked toward her from the end of the corridor. His shoes made that particular sound on linoleum that every parent learns to dread, the steady, measured pace of someone who is about to change the shape of your evening. He stopped in front of her and said, "Mrs. Hayes, we need to talk about your daughter." Lenora opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She pressed her hand against the brass key pendant at her throat, the one she had worn every single day since she was 19 years old. And she held it the way a person holds the last solid thing in a room that has started spinning. 60 days earlier, this woman had been standing in a garden, watching her mother-in-law hand her divorce papers in front of 40 guests. What happened between that garden and this hospital hallway is a story about what it really costs to be the strongest person in the room. And what happens when even the strongest person finally breaks. But to understand that, you have to go back to the beginning. You have to go back to the garden. The garden was beautiful that evening. String lights crossed from post to post overhead, hung low enough to make everything underneath feel warm and golden and close. Round tables sat dressed in white linen with flowers at every center. A banner above the entrance read, "Happy Birthday, Lenora." And it swayed in the late afternoon breeze like it was proud to be there. Neighbors had dressed up. Children ran through the grass, chasing each other the way children do when the world still feels like it was built for exactly that purpose, Someone had set up a speaker near the back fence, and a slow song floated through the air, mixing with laughter and the clink of glasses and the smell of food that had been cooking since morning. It looked like a celebration. It felt like one too, at least for a little while. Lenora stood near the main table in a soft ivory dress. She was 42 years old, graceful in the way a woman becomes when she has been through things and decided not to let those things take her shape. She had a stillness about her that some people mistook for shyness. She was not shy. She was measured. She had a quiet that came from somewhere deep, the kind of quiet that holds more than it ever lets out. Her 3 daughters were running through the garden in matching yellow dresses. Nia was in front, always in front, leading her sisters through a made-up obstacle course between the tables. Celine followed close behind, watching everything with careful eyes, cataloging the world the way she always did. And Dara, the youngest by 4 minutes, brought up the rear with her arms wide open like she was trying to hug the air itself. Lenora watched them run, and her face did what it always did when she looked at those girls. It softened. Whatever she was carrying, whatever she had been carrying for months now, it lifted for just a moment whenever she saw her daughters being exactly what 10-year-old girls should be, free, loud, unaware of what was coming. She poured lemonade into a cup and stood at the edge of the party watching everything with those quiet eyes of hers. Her husband Kofi arrived late, not a little late, the kind of late that makes a statement. He walked through the garden gate with his phone in his hand, barely looking up. He did not walk to Lenora first. He walked to his mother. Claudette Hayes was a tall woman in her late 60s, dressed in deep navy blue, with the posture of someone who had decided a long time ago that softness was a weakness she could not afford. She had sharp eyes and a sharper smile and a way of holding a room that had less to do with warmth and everything to do with authority. She and Kofi embraced. He bent his head close to hers and said something low. She nodded. That was the first thing the guests noticed, not the birthday woman. The late husband and his mother, locked in a private conversation at someone else's party. Then Kofi drifted across the garden toward his friend Deshawn. The two of them found a corner near the fence and started laughing about something. Only they understood. Lenora saw it. She always saw everything. She just never made a scene about what she saw. She picked up her lemonade, took a slow sip, and smiled at the neighbor's wife, who had just walked over to wish her happy birthday. Then the other woman walked in. Her name was Renee Caldwell. She was in her early 30s, overdressed the way people are when they are trying to communicate something without saying it directly. She wore heels too high for a garden party and a smile too confident for someone who had not been invited. She walked through the gate like she had every right to be there, and Kofi saw her from across the lawn and waved her over like she was expected. He introduced her to 2 guests nearby as his colleague. Some people smiled politely. Some people looked at each other with the kind of eye contact that carries a full conversation without a single word. Lenora watched from across the garden. Her face did not change. She set her cup down, walked over to her daughters, and knelt beside Dara to fix the bow on the back of her dress. She took her time with it. She smoothed the fabric. She kissed the top of Dara's head, and she stood back up with the same calm expression she had been wearing all evening. Dara had managed to spill lemonade down the front of Mr. Whitfield's white linen pants on her way to the dessert table. The old man stood there frozen, arms out to his sides, staring down at the yellow stain spreading across his knee like he had just witnessed a crime. Lenora appeared beside him with a napkin and a glass of water and said, without missing a beat, "She gets her aim from her father. Unfortunately, That is about all he has contributed lately. Two guests nearby laughed nervously. Mr. Whitfield snorted. Lenora smiled as if she had said nothing at all, but the laughter did not last long, because what happened next changed everything. The birthday toast was supposed to be warm. It was supposed to be a husband raising a glass to his wife, while guests clapped and children stole cake before dinner, and someone in the back wiped their eyes because love, even ordinary love, is moving when you see it up close. That was what was supposed to happen. Claudette stood up. She did not wait to be introduced. She did not ask for permission. She tapped her glass with a silver spoon, and the talking around the garden fell quiet, one table at a time like dominoes, going still. People turned to look. Claudette straightened her back, lifted her chin, and began to speak. She did not call it a toast. She did not call it a tribute. She called it the truth. She said she had watched her son give 20 years to a woman who never truly deserved him. She said she had stayed quiet long enough, out of respect for the marriage, but that there was no more reason for silence. She said Lenora had come from nothing and had married into the Hayes family for the stability their name represented. She said a real wife, a wife with standing, a wife with something to offer, would have recognized the imbalance long ago and stepped aside with grace. The garden went completely still. The music had stopped. Someone had turned it off, or maybe it just felt that way, because every other sound had disappeared. Guests stared at their plates, at the sky, at the grass, anywhere that was not Lenora's face. Kofi stood near the fence with his hands in his pockets and his eyes fixed on the ground. Deshawn looked at his phone. Renee stood by the dessert table with her arms folded and the smallest, most satisfied smile resting at the corner of her mouth. Then Claudette reached into her handbag. She pulled out a sealed white envelope. She held it up for a moment, just long enough for everyone to see it, and then she walked it across the garden slowly. Her shoulders were back. Her steps were deliberate. She moved like a woman crossing a stage she had rehearsed for years. She set the envelope on the birthday table, right next to the cake that had not yet been cut. She looked at Lenora and said, "Consider this a gift." The air in that garden became something you could feel on your skin, heavy and sharp and electric. 40 people stood frozen in the golden light of string bulbs that suddenly felt too cheerful for what was happening underneath them. Dara began to cry first. Not the loud kind, the silent kind. Tears rolled down her face like they had been waiting behind a door that someone had just opened. Celine grabbed her mother's hand and held it with both of hers, squeezing hard. And Nia, the oldest by 2 minutes, the one with fire behind her eyes, stepped forward. She stepped toward her grandmother. This 10-year-old girl in a yellow dress looked up at the tall woman in navy blue and said, loud enough for the nearest 3 tables to hear, "Why are you being mean to my mama at her birthday?" The garden held its breath. Claudette looked down at her granddaughter with a thin, controlled smile. "Sweetheart," she said, "one day you will understand that the truth is not mean. It is necessary." Nia did not flinch. She did not step back. She said, "My Nana B always said people who are cruel and call it truth are just cowards who got dressed up." Something crossed Claudette's face. Not embarrassment exactly, something closer to recognition. The recognition that this child was not going to bend. That whatever Lenora had put in this girl, it had roots. Kofi's voice came from behind them. "Nia, that is enough." He said it to his daughter, not to his mother, not to the woman who had just humiliated his wife in front of their entire community. He corrected the child. Lenora pulled Nia close. She kissed the top of her head and held her there. She looked at the envelope on the table. She looked at Claudette. She looked at Kofi. He still would not meet her eyes. Then Lenora nodded. Once, slowly. It was not a nod of defeat. It was not surrender. It was the kind of nod that means I already knew this was coming. The kind that means you just made a mistake you do not yet understand. Lenora had learned something from her grandmother, a woman named Bia who raised her on red clay roads in rural Georgia, that most people never learn. When someone shows you who they are, through small choices, showing up late, greeting everyone except you, choosing a corner over the center, believe them. Do not wait for the big betrayal to confirm what the small ones already told you. The small betrayals are not warnings. They are the blueprint. Lenora had been reading that blueprint for 2 years, and tonight it was finally complete. She gathered her daughters. She held Dara's hand and put her arm around Celine and let Nia walk beside her with that fierce, unbroken posture that made her look like a small version of a woman who had already decided what kind of person she was going to be in this world. They walked out of the garden together. Lenora did not look back. Not at the cake, not at the envelope, not at the man she had married, or the mother who had always hated her, or the woman in heels who was already starting to look comfortable in a life that did not belong to her. She walked through the gate and into the evening, and the string lights stayed on behind her, still glowing, still beautiful, still lighting a party that no longer existed. The weeks that followed moved the way betrayal always moves, not in explosions, in slow leaks, in doors that close a little earlier each night, in sentences that get shorter, in silences that grow wider until the silence itself becomes the loudest thing in the house. Kofi moved to the guest bedroom. He did it without announcement, without conversation. He simply stopped sleeping in their bed. When Dara asked him one morning over cereal why Daddy slept in a different room now, he looked at his daughter and said, "Ask your mother." Lenora was standing at the counter with her back to them. She heard it. She did not turn around. She poured Dara's juice and set it on the table and said, "Sometimes grown-ups need space to think, baby. That is all." But that was not all, and they both knew it. Claudette began visiting the house during the day while Kofi was at work. She moved through the rooms like she was taking inventory. She rearranged objects on shelves. She left her perfume on surfaces and her opinion on everything. She opened closets and commented on what she found. She sat in Lenora's kitchen and drank tea from Lenora's cups and told Lenora that she should start thinking about where she would go. "This house has always been a Hayes home," Claudette said one afternoon, stirring her tea without looking up. "It would be best for everyone if the transition was smooth." Lenora stood at the sink, washing dishes she had already washed. She said nothing. She dried her hands. She folded the towel. She placed it on the counter, and she walked out of the room without a word. There is a difference between patience and paralysis that most people never learn to recognize. Patience has a plan. Paralysis just has pain. Lenora looked frozen to everyone around her. She looked like a woman who had no options, no fight, no fire. But underneath that stillness, every single piece was being moved into position. She was not frozen. She was waiting. And there is a universe of difference between the two. The worst moment came on a Tuesday afternoon. Lenora drove to the school to pick up her daughters and found Renee already there. Sitting in the pickup line, driving Kofi's car. She had arrived before Lenora. She was parked in the same spot Lenora always used. When the girls came out, Renee waved from the driver's seat, not to the children, to Lenora. A small wave, casual and deliberate, with a smile that communicated everything It was designed to communicate. Lenora sat in her car and watched Renee drive away with the rearview mirror framing a woman who was practicing, rehearsing, auditioning for a role in a life she had not earned. She drove home. She sat in the driveway for 11 minutes. She gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles went pale. And then she got out of the car and went inside and made dinner and helped Celine with her homework and braided Dara's hair and listened to Nia read aloud from a book about marine biology. She did all of it, the way she always did, the way women do when the house is falling down around them. And the children cannot know yet, because the children are the only thing holding the walls up. Her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, was sitting on her front porch the next morning when Lenora came out to check the mail. Mrs. Patterson was 70 years old, with silver hair and a mouth that had never once in its life been accused of restraint. She had watched the whole school pickup scene from her window. She called out across the fence, "Baby, I have buried 2 husbands, and one of them deserved it. You want me to bake that woman a pie? I have a recipe that will keep her on the toilet for a week." Lenora laughed. A real laugh? The first one in weeks. It came out of her like something that had been locked in a room and finally found the door. "Not yet, Mrs. Patterson," she said, "but I will let you know." Mrs. Patterson nodded slowly. "I will keep the recipe warm." The following Sunday, Lenora took the girls to church, the same church she had attended for 15 years, the same wooden pews, the same stained glass, the same choir that still sang the hymn Lenora had requested for her wedding. But when she walked through the doors, she saw them. Front row, Kofi on the left, Claudette in the middle, and Renee on the right, sitting together, dressed together, positioned together, like a portrait someone had composed on purpose. Pastor James stood at the pulpit and delivered his sermon. He spoke about the sin of holding on to what God has already released. He talked about women who cling to marriages out of pride rather than purpose. He said that sometimes the most faithful thing a person can do is let go of what no longer belongs to them. He looked at Lenora's section of the church 3 times during that sermon. 3 times. After the service, 2 women Lenora had known for a decade walked past her in the parking lot without speaking. One of them leaned toward the patin toward the other and whispered, just loud enough for Lenora to hear. Claudette said she was never really part of the family, just a project girl from Georgia who got lucky. Lenora stood in that parking lot holding Dara's hand. Celine was crying quietly. Nia stood with her jaw tight and her hands balled into fists. "Mama," Nia said, "why did they do that?" Lenora looked at her daughter. "Because someone told them a story about me that is not true, and right now they believe it." Dara looked up with wet eyes. "Can you not just tell them the real story?" Lenora knelt down, so she was eye level with all 3 girls. She put one hand on Nia's cheek and one hand on Dara's shoulder and looked at Celine in the middle. "The real story is not something you tell, baby. It is something you show, and Mama is going to show them. I promise." She meant every word, but the hardest part had not started yet. Claudette had not survived 67 years as the matriarch of the Hayes family by being careless. She was strategic the way certain people are strategic. Not with spreadsheets and timelines, but with people. She understood leverage. She understood narrative. And she understood that the fastest way to win a war is to make sure the other side does not realize they are in one until it is too late. She had been meeting with a family attorney named Gerald Price for weeks. Not just about the divorce, about custody. She had been building a case, brick by brick, document by document, that Lenora was unfit. The evidence she assembled was not dramatic. It did not need to be. She documented that Lenora had no visible employment, no verifiable income, no family support system. She noted that Lenora had been increasingly isolated, that she had no close friends who could serve as character witnesses, that her entire social life revolved around a man who no longer wanted her. She framed Lenora's quietness as withdrawal, her patience as passivity, her dignity as emotional detachment. It was elegant, the way cruelty sometimes is when it puts on a suit and speaks in legal language. Kofi signed everything his mother put in front of him. He did not read the documents carefully. He trusted her. He had always trusted her more than he trusted his own eyes, and certainly more than he had ever trusted the woman he married. One clause, buried in the middle of a page he skimmed, stipulated that Lenora must vacate the family home within 60 days of the divorce filing. Another clause listed Claudette as a proposed co-guardian in the custody arrangement. On a Tuesday morning, while the girls were at school and the house was quiet, a process server knocked on Lenora's front door. She opened it in the clothes she had been gardening in, dirt still on her knees, hair pulled back with a clip. He handed her a legal envelope. She signed for it. She closed the door. She stood in the hallway and opened it. Eviction notice. 60 days. She turned to the next page. Emergency custody filing. Claudette Hayes listed as proposed co-guardian. Ground stated, financial instability, emotional withdrawal, lack of verifiable means to support 3 minor children. Lenora read those words twice, then a third time. Her hands began to shake, not the way they had shaken at the birthday party, which was controlled, contained, barely visible. This was different. This shaking started in her chest and moved outward through her arms and into her fingers until the paper rattled against itself. She walked into the bathroom. She locked the door. She sat down on the cold tile floor with her back against the bathtub, and she cried. Not quietly, not the way she always cried, silent and dignified and contained. She cried the way a person cries when the one thing they swore they would protect is being threatened by people who do not even understand what they are touching. She pressed her hand over her mouth so the sound would not carry through the walls in case her daughters somehow came home early and heard their mother breaking apart on a bathroom floor. She cried for her girls. She cried for the years she had given this family. She cried for every dinner she had cooked, and every holiday she had hosted, and every time she had swallowed her pride to keep the peace because she believed the peace was worth it. And then she looked up. She looked at herself in the mirror above the sink. Her eyes were swollen. Her face was wet, and there, at the hollow of her throat, was the brass key pendant, the one Nana Bia had pressed into her palm when she was 19 years old, the one she had worn every single day since. She touched it. She breathed. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She picked up her phone and called Mr. Ellington. He answered on the second ring. He always answered on the second ring. "They're coming for my girls, Ellington." His voice came through the phone the way it always did, warm, steady, unshakable. The voice of a man who had spent 18 years building a fortress around a woman most people did not know was a fortress herself. "They can come," he said. "They will not get them. But Lenora, it is time to start thinking about the timeline. We cannot wait much longer." She closed her eyes. "Not yet. I need one more thing first." When someone attacks your character, when they come for your reputation, your fitness as a mother, your right to exist in the spaces you built with your own hands, the instinct is to defend, to explain, to stand in the middle of the room and say, "No, that is not who I am." But Lenora had learned something that most people learn too late. She did not defend. She documented. Every lie Claudette told, Every visit Renee made to the school, every document Kofi signed without reading, Lenora's team was recording, filing, time-stamping everything. Her silence was not her weakness. It was her evidence collection period. And that period was almost over. To understand what Lenora was protecting, you have to understand where she came from. She was born in a small town in rural Georgia, where the roads were red clay and the porches were wooden and wide, and the morning air smelled like pine and something baking. Her parents died when she was 7, a car accident on a wet highway in late November, the kind of night that takes things without warning and leaves a silence where a family used to be. She went to live with her grandmother, Nana Bia, a small woman who had never been small in any way that mattered. She worked land that had been in the family for 3 generations. She kept a garden that fed them through hard winters. She went to church on Sundays and believed in God the way people believe in something they have actually seen show up. She raised Lenora to be grounded, rooted, unshakable in the quiet way that old trees are unshakable. Not loud, not aggressive, just deeply, permanently planted. When Lenora was 19 and in her first year of college, Nana B got sick. The kind of sick that does not reverse itself. On her last lucid afternoon, she pressed something into Lenora's palm, a pendant on a thin chain, brass, shaped like an old skeleton key, worn smooth from generations of being handled. Nana B held Lenora's hand, closed around it, and said, "This is not just jewelry, baby. It is a reminder. Everything locked will open when the time is right." What Lenora did not know until after the funeral was that the land Nana B left her, those quiet acres in Georgia that smelled like cedar and lavender, sat on top of mineral rights worth more than anyone in that small town had ever imagined. Over the next 18 years, with Mr. Ellington's guidance, Lenora built Nana Bia Holdings from that inheritance. Real estate across 6 states, a private equity division, strategic land acquisitions, patient legal maneuvering that compounded year after year after year. Total valuation as of this year, $17.3 billion. She never told Kofi, not because she was hiding, because Nana Bia had taught her to watch before she trusted, and she had been watching Kofi for a very long time. She did not hide her wealth out of secrecy. She hid it out of wisdom. Because the only way to truly know who someone is to let them believe you have nothing and then watch carefully how they treat you. She had been watching, and now she knew. Mr. Ellington's legal team moved with the quiet efficiency of people who had been preparing for this exact scenario for years. Within 72 hours of the eviction notice, they filed a counter motion that dismantled it on a single, devastating technicality. The house was not in Kofi's name. It was not in the Hayes family name. It was held in a private trust administered by a holding company that traced back, through 3 layers of carefully constructed legal architecture, to Nana Bia Holdings, LLC. The judge reviewed the filing. He reviewed the trust documents, and he threw out the eviction notice with a single sentence that Gerald Price would later describe to Claudette as the worst thing he had heard in a courtroom in 20 years. The petitioner has no standing to request the removal of a resident from a property to which the petitioner holds no title. Claudette sat in her car outside the courthouse and gripped the steering wheel so hard her rings left marks on her palms. She did not understand what had just happened. She thought Lenora had gotten lucky. A good lawyer, a loophole, a technicality. She did not yet understand that she was standing on a foundation she could not see. That evening, Kofi came home and found the locks unchanged. The lights were on. Music was playing softly from the kitchen. Lenora was at the stove, cooking dinner the way she had cooked dinner 1,000 times before. She looked at him when he walked in. She did not look away. She did not look angry. She said, simply, "The girls need their father at the table tonight. Sit down." He sat. They ate. The girls talked about school. Dara described a caterpillar she had found on the playground in such extraordinary detail that Celine finally said, "Dara, it is a caterpillar, not a celebrity." Nia laughed so hard she choked on her water. For 20 minutes, it almost felt normal, almost felt like a family. Dara said, halfway through dinner, "Mama, Nia told a boy at school that her mother could buy his whole family, and he cried." Lenora looked at Nia. Nia shrugged. "He said girls cannot be bosses." Lenora paused for exactly 2 seconds. Then she said, "We do not make people cry, Nia, Beat. We make them rethink their assumptions quietly. There is a difference." Celine leaned over to Dara and whispered, just loud enough for the whole table to hear, "That means yes." That night, after the dishes were done and the girls were asleep, Lenora sat in the garden alone. She allowed herself, for the first time in months, to exhale. Maybe she could navigate this without detonating everything. Maybe she could protect the girls, handle the divorce quietly, and keep the empire hidden. Maybe the peaceful path was still possible. She held that hope for exactly 9 days. Deshaun Mitchell had been Kofi's best friend since college. He was the kind of man who stood beside you at your wedding and behind you for everything after. He laughed at your jokes, even when they were not funny. He showed up when you called. He was loyal, the way a shadow is loyal. Always present, always following, never leading. But shadows do not have spines. And Deshaun had been feeding Claudette information for months. It happened at a school fundraiser. Lenore was standing near the back of the gymnasium, talking quietly, on her phone, with Mr. Ellington about a restructuring timeline. She did not see Deshaun walk up behind her. She did not know he was close enough to hear. He did not catch the details, but he caught 2 words: holdings and trust. He told Claudette that same evening. Claudette did not know the full picture, but she now knew there was a picture. Something behind the curtain. Something Lenora had been hiding. She hired a private investigator the next morning. The investigator was good, but Lenora's legal architecture was better. He could not penetrate the layers of trusts and shell entities and state line protections that Mr. Ellington had spent 18 years constructing. But he found one thread, a property in Savannah, Georgia, registered to a company called Nanabia LLC. One thread was enough. Claudette went to Kofi with the finding. She did not present it as a discovery. She presented it as a betrayal. She said, "Your wife has been hiding assets from you. She has been lying to you for your entire marriage. She has a company. She has property. She has money she never told you about. What kind of woman hides money from her own husband?" She reframed Lenora's secret. Not as strength, not as independence, not as the wisdom of a woman who needed to know who she had married before she revealed what she had built. She reframed it as deception, as manipulation, as proof that Lenora had never truly been part of the family. And Kofi, whose pride had been fed by his mother for months, the way a fire is fed by someone who wants the whole room to burn, believed her. Lenora decided to try one more time, not for Kofi, not even for herself, for the 3 girls sleeping upstairs who still asked every night when things were going to go back to normal. She called Kofi and asked him to meet her alone. No lawyers, no mothers, no Renee, just the 2 of them, at the coffee shop on Decatur Street, where they had gone on their second date 20 years ago. He agreed. He came. They sat across from each other in a booth near the window, with the afternoon light falling across the table between them. Lenora ordered his coffee, the way she always had, black with 1 sugar, and he noticed, and something in his face shifted. She told him a partial truth. She said she had resources he did not know about. She said she had been careful with money for years and had built something she was not ready to discuss in detail. She said she was willing to make the divorce fair, more than fair, generous. She said she did not want a war. "I want the girls to have both parents," she said. "I want them to look back on this and know that we handled it with dignity. I am asking you, Kofi, not as your wife, as the mother of your children. Let us end this like 2 people who once loved each other." Kofi looked at her. For a long, quiet moment, he was the man she had married. The warm one. The one who made rooms feel lighter. His eyes got wet. His voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. "Lenora," he said, "I do not know how we got here." She reached across the table and touched his hand. "We do not have to know how we got here. We just have to decide how we leave." He nodded. They agreed. They shook hands across a table where they had once held hands, and the difference between those 2 gestures contained 20 years of everything that had gone right and then gone wrong. Lenora drove home with the windows down and the evening air on her face. She parked in the driveway and sat there for a moment, breathing. She had extended grace, not because Kofi deserved it, but because she refused to let bitterness decide what kind of woman she was going to be on the other side of this. Bitterness is a choice. Grace is a harder one. And she had made hers. For 5 days, she believed it was over. On the 6th day, Kofi went home and told Claudette about the conversation. He said maybe they should just settle. Maybe this had gone far enough. Claudette erupted. She told him about the private investigator, about Nanabia LLC, about the property in Savannah. She said Lenora had been hiding a company, hiding money, hiding an entire financial life for the duration of their marriage. "She is not offering you peace, Kofi. She is offering you pennies so she can keep the fortune. She has been playing you. Your entire marriage was a lie." Then Renee made her move. She had been quiet for weeks, watching, calculating, waiting for exactly this kind of opening. She showed Kofi a public filing she had found, a property acquisition linked to Nanabia LLC worth several $1,000,000. She set her phone on the table with the screen facing him and said, "She has been playing you, Kofi, the whole time." And she sat in that coffee shop and held your hand while she did it. Kofi's face changed. The softness from the coffee shop, the wet eyes, the almost human moment of regret, all of it evaporated. What replaced it was not anger, exactly. It was humiliation, the particular kind of humiliation a man feels when he realizes a woman he underestimated has been 3 steps ahead of him for 20 years. He called his attorney that evening. "I want everything, the house, primary custody, and I want her investigated for hidden assets. All of them." Lenora got the call from Mr. Ellington at 9:14 that night. She was sitting in his garden, still holding the piece she had believed in 6 days ago. "They know about Nanabia," Ellington said. "Not the full scope, not even close, but they know it exists, and they are coming with everything." The peaceful path was gone. The quiet exit had been destroyed by the same people who had destroyed everything else, and now they were coming for her children. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with sleep. It is the exhaustion of carrying something enormous in complete solitude for so long that your arms have forgotten what it feels like to set it down. Lenora had been carrying her secret, her empire, her grief, her composure for months. And on this night, sitting alone in the garden, with the phone still warm in her hand, she felt the weight of all of it at once. She called Mr. Ellington back. When he answered, her voice broke. Not cracked, broke. The way a voice breaks when the person behind it has been holding a door shut for so long that their muscles have finally given out. Ellington, I am tired, she paused. I am so tired. I have been carrying this alone since I was 19 years old. I built everything right. I did everything right. And they are still taking from me. They are still coming for the only things I actually care about. She could not finish the sentence. Ellington was quiet for a moment. She could hear him breathing on the other end, steady and slow. The way a person breathes when they are choosing their words carefully because they know the person listening needs exactly the right ones. Lenora, he said, you did not do everything right. You did everything alone. And that was the one mistake you made. You never let anyone carry this with you. But I am here. I have been here for 18 years, and I need you to hear me. He paused. They found a thread. They did not find the tapestry. They do not know what they are standing on. And when they find out, it will not just change the case. It will change everything they thought they knew about you, about themselves, and about what power actually looks like. Another pause, longer this time. But Lenora, you have to be willing to stop hiding. Not for them, for you, for those girls. They need to see their mother stand in the full truth of who she is, not someday, soon. She was quiet for a long time. The garden was dark around her. The oak tree was a silhouette against the sky. The brass pendant was warm against her skin. Then she said, set up the gala. Before the gala could happen, the world cracked open 3 more times. The custody hearing came first. Claudette's attorney filed an emergency motion arguing that Lenora had committed financial fraud by concealing assets during the marriage, making her, in the language of the filing, deceptive, and therefore unfit for primary custody. Claudette took the stand as a character witness. She was polished, sympathetic, devastating. She cried on cue, a single tear that she wiped away with a tissue she had ready in her hand. And she said, I just want to protect my granddaughters from a woman who has spent her entire marriage lying to this family. The judge ordered a full investigation into Lenora's financial holdings. Lenora's secret was now on a legal clock. If the investigators found the full scope of Nanaba's holdings before the gala, her reveal would happen on someone else's terms, in someone else's framework, stripped of every ounce of power and dignity she had been building toward. The clock was ticking. And then it got worse. The pressure that had been building in the Hayes household for months finally found its way to the person least equipped to carry it. Nia. It happened on a Wednesday at school. A boy in her class, a kid whose parents were friends with Claudette, said something he had heard at his own dinner table. He said, your dad does not even want your mom anymore. He has got a new girlfriend. Nia told him to stop. He did not stop. He said, my mom said your mom is broke, and that is why your dad is leaving. Nia pushed him, hard. He fell backward into a desk, and the corner of it caught his forehead and opened a cut above his eyebrow. There was blood. The teacher screamed. The boy started crying. Nia stood in the middle of the classroom with her hands still out in front of her, and her chest heaving and her eyes wide, not with rage anymore, but with the sudden, terrible understanding that she had done something she could not take back. Lenora was in a meeting with Mr. Ellington when her phone rang. She saw the school's number, and every other thought in her mind went dark. She drove to the hospital. The injured boy had been taken there as a precaution. His cut needed stitches, Lenora ran through the emergency room entrance still wearing her meeting clothes, her heels clicking against the floor, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. A doctor walked toward her. "Mrs. Hayes, we need to talk about your daughter." This was the moment from the beginning. The hospital hallway, the fluorescent lights, the shaking hands. For one terrible, airless second, Lenora thought something had happened to Nia. The doctor explained. Nia was fine physically. The other child would be fine, but the school was filing a behavioral report. Nia was suspended for 5 days. Lenora found her daughter in the school counselor's office. Nia was sitting in a plastic chair with her arms crossed and her jaw set, trying to look strong, trying to hold the position she had taken. But when she saw her mother walk through the door, the fortress collapsed. "I am sorry, Mama." Her voice cracked. "He said Daddy does not love you, and I just could not. I could not let him." Lenora crossed the room and pulled her daughter into her arms. She held her there, tight, one hand on the back of Nia's head, the other pressed flat against her back. She said nothing for a full minute. She just held her. Then she said, "You are my daughter. You have my fire. But fire without direction burns the person holding it. You do not have to fight for me, baby. I am fighting for us. And I promise you, it is almost over." She understood something in that hospital hallway that changed everything. Her silence was no longer just protecting her strategy, it was hurting her children. Sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is not to endure more. It is to decide that the people she loves have carried enough of her war. That is not weakness. That is the highest form of strength. Knowing when the cost of waiting has exceeded the benefit of holding on. The cost had exceeded the benefit. It was time. 2 days after Nia's suspension, Lenora came home from the hospital with her daughter. It was late afternoon. The light was golden through the front windows. She could smell something cooking before she opened the door. She walked inside and stopped. There was a suitcase in the hallway. It was not hers. It was not Kofi's. She heard laughter from the kitchen. She walked toward it the way a person walks toward a sound they already know will hurt them, slowly, with every sense sharpened. Renee was standing at the stove. She was wearing an apron Lenora had bought 3 years ago at a farmer's market in Savannah. She was cooking. She was cooking in Lenora's kitchen, with Lenora's pots. On Lenora's stove, in Lenora's house. The girls were sitting at the table. Their faces were wrong. Celine was holding Dara's hand under the table. Nia was staring at her plate without touching it. They looked like children who had been placed in a scene they did not understand and told to behave. Renee looked up and smiled. "I made the girls' favorite, mac and cheese. Dara told me about it last time I was here. I hope that is okay." She said it with warmth. Practiced warmth. The kind of warmth that takes rehearsal. Lenora stood in the doorway of her own kitchen. She looked at the woman at the stove. She looked at the apron. She looked at her daughter's faces, and she felt something she had never allowed herself to feel in the entire duration of this war. Rage. Pure, clean, focused rage. Not the kind that screams, not the kind that throws things, the kind that goes completely quiet, because the body understands that the force of what it is feeling is too large to release safely in a room with children. She looked at Renee. She held the woman's gaze for 3 full seconds without blinking. Then she said, very quietly, "Enjoy the kitchen. It has a beautiful view. I designed it myself." She turned. She took her 3 daughters by the hand, all 3 of them. Nia on her left, Dara on her right, Celine walking close behind. She walked them upstairs. She took them into her bedroom. She closed the door. They sat on the bed together. Dara's chin was trembling. Celine had not let go of her sister's hand. Dara said in a voice so small it barely made it across the room. Mama, is that lady going to live here? Lenora looked at her youngest daughter. She put both hands on Dara's face and held it gently, the way you hold something you would burn the whole world down to protect. No, baby. Nobody lives here but us. And very soon, everyone is going to know that. She picked up her phone. She called Mr. Ellington. Move the gala up. This week, I do not care what it takes. There was a pause on the other end. Then Ellington's voice, steady as it had been for 18 years. Already done. Thursday. Everything is ready, Lenora. It has always been ready. Thursday came, the way important days always come, looking ordinary from the outside. The sun rose the same way it always did. Traffic moved, people went to work. Somewhere across the city, caterers loaded vans, and florists trimmed stems, and a sound crew tested a speaker system in the courtyard of a newly renovated community arts center. The gala was the social event of the season. White tents stretched across the grounds, anchored by poles wrapped in ivy and soft lights. Round tables held candle centerpieces that flickered in the early evening air. A live quartet played near the garden entrance. Women arrived in evening gowns. Men came in tailored suits. This was the gathering where the city's most prominent black families came to be seen, to give, and to belong to something larger than themselves. Kofi arrived early. Claudette was on his left in a red dress, radiant, commanding the kind of attention she had spent a lifetime learning to attract. Renee was on his right, polished and poised, wearing a smile that said she had already won. The three of them moved through the space like a unit, greeting people, accepting compliments, performing the narrative Claudette had been constructing for months. The rescued son, the supportive mother, the better woman. People believed what they were shown. They usually do. Lenora arrived late. She came alone through the main entrance in a deep burgundy gown that did not announce itself but commanded every room it entered. The brass key pendant was at her throat, the same as always. She walked slowly, not because she was nervous, because she had never been in a hurry to get to a thing she was already certain of. Guests near the entrance turned to look. Someone at a nearby table lowered their glass. The quiet that followed her through the room was not discomfort. It was recognition, the sense that something important had just entered the space and was not planning to leave. She greeted a few people warmly. She accepted a glass of water from a server. She found a seat at a table near the center of the tent and sat down with the composure of a woman who owned the floor beneath her chair. Which, as it happened, she did. Kofi saw her from across the tent. His expression shifted. Something moved behind his eyes. Not guilt, exactly. Something more complicated. The dawning, half-formed realization that he might have made a mistake too large to calculate from where he was standing. The evening's host was Dr. Vivian Okafor, a physician and philanthropist who had spent 30 years building institutions in this city. She was dignified, precise, and she did not waste words. She approached the microphone. The quartet played itself quiet. The crowd settled. Dr. Okafor thanked the guests. She spoke briefly about the Art Center, about what community means, about the kind of giving that does not seek a stage. Then she said there was one announcement she had been looking forward to all evening. She said that the gala tonight, the full renovation of the building behind them, and a new scholarship fund being launched this year had all been made possible by a single private philanthropic contribution. She said the holding company responsible had been operating quietly in the community for nearly 2 decades, building, investing, waiting to give back at the right scale at the right time. She paused. Then she said the name, Nanabia Holdings, LLC. The tent went quiet, not the normal quiet of polite attention. The deep quiet that happens when a name lands and people feel it before they fully understand it. Dr. Okafor said, "I would like to invite the founder and chief executive of Nanabia Holdings to come forward." Lenora set her water glass on the table. She stood up. She smoothed the front of her gown, and she walked to the microphone with the same unhurried, grounded pace she had carried her entire life. She did not look at Kofi. She did not look at Claudette. She faced the crowd. She spoke for 6 minutes. She said her grandmother's name first and let it sit in the air. Her name was Bee. She raised me on a red clay road in Georgia with a garden that fed us through winters and a faith that carried us through everything else. She taught me that dignity is not something you perform. It is something you protect. She taught me that the loudest thing a woman can do is outlast what tried to break her. She paused. She gave me a key. Lenora touched the pendant at her throat. She said everything locked will open when the time is right. She looked toward the table where her daughters were seated, all three in burgundy to match their mother, Nia, Celine, and Dara, watching with wide, still eyes. She smiled at them. They smiled back. The time is right. The screen behind the tent center pole lit up. Clean, professional, simple. It showed the profile of Nanabia Holdings. Total asset valuation, $17.3 billion. Properties across 6 states. Mineral rights acquired through a land inheritance and 2 decades of patient legal strategy. A real estate portfolio. A private equity division. A newly established philanthropic foundation. And near the bottom of the screen, listed among the holdings, a single residential property address, the address of the house Kofi and Claudette had assumed would be theirs when the divorce was finalized. The house Renee had moved her suitcase into 2 days ago. The house where she had made mac and cheese in Lenora's kitchen wearing Lenora's apron. The crowd read it. Then they understood. Kofi stood up. His glass fell from his hand and hit the table, but did not break. He walked 3 steps toward the front of the tent and then stopped, frozen in the middle of the aisle, caught between retreat and confrontation. He said it loud enough for the tent to hear. "Lenora, you lied to me. For 20 years you lied to me." Lenora turned to face him. The crowd went completely silent. Even the candles seemed to hold still. She said, "I did not lie to you, Kofi. I watched you. There is a difference." She took 1 step toward him, not aggressive, measured. "I watched you choose your mother over your wife. I watched you bring another woman to my birthday party. I watched you let your mother hand me divorce papers next to my own cake while our daughters cried. I watched you sign away your rights without reading what was on the page because you trusted the person handing it to you more than you ever trusted me." She paused. "I did not lie to you. I just never interrupted you while you were showing me who you are." Kofi opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He stood there in his tailored suit in front of 300 people, and he had nothing to say. Not because he was choosing silence, because for the first time in his life, every word he could think of was inadequate for the size of what he had lost. Claudette stepped forward. Her red dress caught the light. Her hands were shaking. "This is a performance," she said. "This is manipulation. You hid this from our family." Lenora turned to her. Calm, steady, the same calm she had carried in the garden, the same calm she had carried in the church parking lot, the same calm she had carried standing in her own kitchen watching another woman feed her children. "Your family," Lenora said. "Mrs. Hayes, let me be clear. The tent was so quiet you could hear the candle flames. The house you told me to leave, I own it. The land this arts center sits on, I donated it. The church where your pastor gave a sermon about me. My foundation funded its renovation 3 years ago. She let each sentence land before she began the next one. You spent 20 years treating me like I was beneath you. I spent 20 years building everything around you. The difference between us, Mrs. Hayes, is that I never needed you to know. Claudette stepped backward. Her face changed. Something behind her eyes collapsed. Not dramatically, not with a sound, but the way a structure collapses when the ground beneath it shifts. And it realizes, all at once, that it was never standing on anything solid. Renee had been edging toward the exit since the screen lit up. She was almost to the tent flap when Dr. Okafor spoke into the microphone one more time. Ms. Caldwell, before you leave, you should know that Nanabia Holdings' legal team has filed a civil complaint regarding your unauthorized entry into the Hayes residence and your documented attempts to interfere with an active custodial arrangement. I would recommend you stay. Renee froze. The entire tent turned to look at her. Her mask, the practiced smile, the calculated warmth, the careful performance she had been maintaining for 14 months dropped completely. She looked at Kofi, not with affection, not even with strategy, with the expression of someone who has just realized that the ship she boarded is sinking and every lifeboat is gone. From a table near the back of the tent, a voice carried clearly across the room. Mrs. Patterson, 70 years old, silver hair, zero filter, leaned toward the woman next to her and said, loud enough for 6 tables to hear, I told her I had a pie recipe. She should have let me use it. The laugh that went through the tent was not loud. It was the kind of laugh that people release when the tension has been so high for so long that the body needs somewhere to put it. It was relief and recognition and the particular joy that comes from watching someone earn a moment they deserved. As the room settled, a small figure stood up from the children's table. Nia. She walked toward her mother, not running, walking, with the same unhurried, measured step that Lenora carried. She took her mother's hand. She looked out at the crowd, at her father frozen in the aisle, at her grandmother gripping her clutch, at Renee pinned near the exit. Then she looked up at Lenora and said, loud enough for the front 3 tables to hear, you said the real story is not something you tell. It is something you show. She squeezed her mother's hand. You showed them, Mama. Celine and Dara were already running. They reached their mother and sister and wrapped themselves into the group. 4 bodies holding each other in front of 300 people who were now seeing, for the first time, exactly who this family was. Lenora held her daughters. Her eyes were full. The pendant caught the light. She did not say anything else. She did not need to. The ground had spoken for her. The divorce concluded 5 weeks after the gala. It did not conclude the way Claudette had arranged it. The documents Kofi had signed, without reading carefully, the ones his mother had slid across a kitchen table with the confidence of a woman who believed she was engineering a victory, contained clauses his own attorneys later described as deeply and irreversibly unfavorable. He had relinquished claims he did not know he was relinquishing. He had waived protections he did not know existed. He had signed his name at the bottom of pages that quietly transferred control of assets, custodial rights, and property claims in directions his mother had never anticipated, because his mother had never imagined those assets existed in the first place. When his legal team finally understood the full picture of Lenora's financial position, the posture of aggressive negotiation they had been preparing dissolved overnight. They did not fight. They managed expectations. They sat Kofi down in a conference room and explained, in the careful language attorneys use when they are delivering news no one wants to hear, that the best outcome he could realistically achieve was significantly different from the outcome he had imagined. The house transferred back into Lenora's trust. Kofi's financial position stripped of assets he had believed were shared, was substantially smaller than the life he had built in his mind. He was not ruined, but he was far from where he thought he would land. His reputation followed a different timeline. The story moved through their community, the way true things always move, not through announcement, but through the slow, steady correction of what people thought they knew. The same neighbors who had stood in that birthday garden, the same family friends who had watched Claudette carry an envelope across the lawn, the same churchgoers who had sat through Pastor James's targeted sermon. They put it together, and they moved accordingly. Some people said nothing directly to Kofi. They just stopped calling, stopped inviting, stopped including, which in many ways was its own verdict. Renee was gone within 2 weeks of the gala. She returned Kofi's last 3 messages with silence. She was seen at a professional dinner shortly after on the arm of someone else entirely, laughing in that comfortable, unbothered way of hers, already composing the next chapter of something that had nothing to do with Kofi. He had believed she cared for him. He had not understood that she had been reading a balance sheet, and when the balance sheet changed, so did she. Claudette carried the weight of what she had done in the way that proud people carry consequences. Publicly, she said nothing. Privately, the architecture of her social life began to collapse. Church friends, neighbors, women whose respect she had spent decades cultivating, some of them were kind enough not to say anything to her face. Some were not. She had orchestrated a public humiliation at a birthday party in front of the very same community that later sat in a white tent and watched a screen reveal that the woman she had tried to destroy owned everything around them. There is no recovering from that kind of exposure, not because the community is cruel, because the community remembers. Pastor James called Lenora 2 weeks after the gala. He said he owed her an apology. He said he had been given information by Claudette that he should have verified before allowing it to influence his ministry. He said he was sorry. Lenora listened. She thanked him for calling. She was gracious because that was who she was, and she never went back to that church. Deshawn tried to reach Kofi. He called 4 times in 3 days. Kofi did not answer. He had learned in the aftermath of everything something about loyalty that Deshawn had never understood. Loyalty is not about standing next to someone. It is about what you do when they are not in the room, and Deshawn had failed that test so completely that the failure itself had become the answer. Kofi saw his daughters. He would always see his daughters, but he saw them from a distance he had created himself, across a gap he had dug with his own choices, and he would spend years learning what that distance cost. There is a specific kind of loss that does not announce itself loudly. It just settles in. It takes up residence in the quiet spaces of a life and stays there. It is the loss of being seen clearly by the people who once looked up to you and finding in their eyes not hatred, but simply the absence of the illusion they once held. That was what Kofi lived with. Not the money, not the house, the being truly seen, finally, after everything. The garden was quiet at 6 in the morning. The string lights were long gone. The banner was gone. The tables had been cleared months ago. There was nothing decorative left in the space, just the garden itself, the old oak tree near the fence, the flower beds Lenora had planted in the 2nd year of living in this house, the stone path that curved from the back door to the table at the center. Everything was still. Lenora sat at that table with a cup of tea, both hands wrapped around the mug. The steam rose in the morning air and disappeared. She was not thinking about anything specific. She was doing something rarer and harder than thinking. She was resting, actually resting. The way a person rests when the thing they have been braced for has finally passed and the body starts to release the holding it has been doing for months. She reached up and touched the pendant at her throat, the brass key, smooth and warm from her skin. She closed her eyes. She thought about a wooden porch in Georgia. She thought about flower and lavender and cedarwood. She thought about a small woman's hands pressing something cold into her palm and a voice saying words that had carried her across 2 decades of building, of waiting, of loving, of losing, of standing back up again. Everything locked will open when the time is right. She opened her eyes. She looked at the oak tree near the fence. The early light was coming through the branches in long, slanted lines, turning everything gold. Then she heard the back door open. All 3 of them came out at once, still in pajamas. Nia first, with her hair wild from sleep and her feet bare on the stone. Then Celine, with one sock on and one in her hand, squinting against the morning light. Then Dara, the youngest by 4 minutes, running down the path in bare feet, calling out before she even reached the table. "Mama!" Lenora turned in her chair and opened her arms. They piled into her. All 3 of them, Nia on the right, Dara in the middle, Celine folding in from the left. The tea nearly spilled. Nobody cared. Lenora pulled them in and held them there, her arms around all 3 daughters at once. Her face pressed into the top of Dara's head. She breathed in. She held on. She let herself be held. The morning light fell across the table, across the girls in their pajamas, across Lenora's hands on their backs. It was golden and quiet and full of the specific kind of peace that only comes after something hard has finally ended, and the people who survived it are still here and still together and still holding on. Nia looked up after a moment. She asked the question she had been asking for months, but she asked it differently this time. Not anxious, not pleading, real. The way a child asks when she is beginning to believe the answer. Is everything going to be okay now? Lenora looked at her oldest daughter. She touched her face with one hand. She smiled. Yes, everything is going to be okay. She said that the way Nana B used to answer questions that mattered, simply, directly, without hesitation, because the answer was true and the person asking deserved to hear it that way. Lenora's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen, a text from Mr. Ellington. The board approved it this morning. Nanabia Foundation's first full scholarship class. 30 girls from rural Georgia, all full ride. Nana B's name is on the building. Lenora read the words. She read them again. Her eyes filled. She looked at the oak tree. She looked at her daughters. She touched the brass key pendant one last time. It was not a gesture of triumph. It was not a gesture of victory. It was a conversation with a woman who was no longer here, but whose voice had never stopped speaking. A small woman on a red clay road who had planted something in a 7-year-old girl that grew into roots no storm could pull up. They thought her silence was emptiness. They mistook her patience for weakness. They saw a woman who said nothing and assumed she had nothing to say. But a woman who builds in secret, who carries her power quietly, who waits for the right moment with the discipline to let every insult and every injury pass through her without changing the shape of who she is, that woman does not need to announce herself. The ground itself speaks for her, and sometimes, when the time is finally right, everything locked opens all at once, right on time. If you saw yourself in Lenora today, or if you saw someone you love, drop a comment below and tell us what part hit you the hardest. Do not forget to like this video because it helps more people find stories like this one. Subscribe if you have not already. We put our whole heart into every single story on this channel. And share this one with someone who needs to hear it today. Because sometimes the strongest person in the room is the quietest one in the garden. Closing disclaimer: this story was fully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful content with real emotional value and life lessons. Every character, every scene, and every word was carefully crafted by hand. Thank you for watching, and thank you for being part of this community.